We don't need to look at places like the digital sales tax that can inflame differences between our country. We need to think about places where we can work together. So we need to be prepared so that we can actually do the things that are going to recognize our mutual interests and move forward rapidly.
Yes, we're back. Hi. Sorry for the delay this morning. I was just about to start and lost visual here, so I had to reload all of the material. Sometimes it happens, but anyway, welcome back to Stand on Guard. I'm your host, David Krayden, broadcasting live. Yeah, it's live, and when you're broadcasting live, sometimes you have problems, but we overcame them. So when we come back momentarily, the news, of course, today is that Carney caved, Canada wins on the digital services tax. We'll be right back in mere moments with more.
The Prime Minister lied and his minions continue to lie.
We need political change. But we also need to resolve to resist. Yes, please subscribe if you haven't. Please resubscribe if you must. Sometimes YouTube plays nasty tricks on us, and our subscription level has been slightly below what it should be this month, but you were catching up. Thank you for all your support. I've been telling you all month about how YouTube had its thumb on our numbers, and it looks like we've beaten that. Couldn't do it without you. So please share this broadcast with your friends and your family, your loved ones, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, husband, wife, children, anybody who is interested in saving this country. And that's what we try to do. So the big news, of course, Canada to resume trade talks with the U.S. after rescinding digital services tax. Wow. I'm taking credit for this. Well, not really. But I think, I don't know if this was always in the cards to begin with. And of course, there were so many people saying, oh, Mark Carney's playing his cards so smart here. He's going to force Trump into concessions with the digital services tax. And of course, I'll show you a clip of a Liberal staffer saying, oh, Mark Carney understands Donald Trump better than anybody. He's going to outwit him. And he's going to force concessions from Donald Trump. Well, Donald Trump just put the pressure on. And that was it. That was it, folks. And of course, Frank Lutnick thanked Canada. Howard Lutnick, excuse me, U.S. Commerce Secretary, thanked Canada. And he said, if we hadn't have rescinded the digital services or digital sales tax, it would have been a deal breaker. This from the Canadian press yesterday. Howard Lutnick is probably one of the more reasonable people in the Trump cabinet as far as tariffs go and trade goes. So when Howard Lutnick says, thank you for being reasonable, Canada, it means quite a bit. I can assure you that. Now, a lot of folks, I'm going to play the interview first. A lot of folks on X this morning are saying, oh, it's not over, because they don't read everything. They just watch an interview in the morning and they go, oh, Donald Trump's not going to resume trade talks with us unless we include dairy products. Well, Donald Trump always talks about dairy products. And let me get this out of the way. Donald Trump has been talking about dairy products and the tariffs on dairy products for years. It's really a non-issue. And Donald Trump knows this, because Canadian dairy products are highly protected with supply management. That's not going to change. If you recall, it's the dairy industry that put Andrew Scheer in charge of the Conservative Party when he basically said, you're going to get your supply management, even though it's got nothing to do with conservative principles. That will continue ad infinitum. So yes, it is like 300% tariffs, but the United States doesn't really want Canadian cheese and milk. They've got enough of their own. And Canada doesn't really want American cheese and milk because we have enough of our own. So it's a bit of a mirage. But let's listen to what Donald Trump said yesterday to Maria Bartiromo on Fox News. And Maria is one of my favorites in Fox.
You said you're stopping all trade discussions with Canada? until such time as they drop certain taxes, yeah.
The digital
People don't
services
realize
tax.
Canada is very nasty to deal with. They've charged our farmers up to 400%, almost 400% on certain products and certain, things. While farmers want to send it, they have to pay 200, 300, 400%. People don't know that. Canada is a very tough country to deal with. I will say that.
But
and I love Canada.
You have USMCA in place.
I know, but
You'll have to do it.
but USMCA is no good if they cheat.
What does that mean?
Well, there's been things going on that we don't like, and things going on where they took advantage. And hopefully, we'll be fine with Canada. I love Canada. Frankly, Canada should be the 51st state. Okay, it really should, because Canada relies entirely on the United States. We don't rely on Canada.
That, of course, is absolute BS, because the United States relies on Canada for cheap oil and gas. And Premier Daniel Smith from Alberta has pointed this out. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has pointed this out many, many times. Our energy relationship with the United States is not one of any subsidies. Donald Trump talks about the United States subsidizing Canada. Well, actually, we subsidize the United States because we send them cheap oil. They refine it and send it back as gasoline, because we don't refine any oil in this country. And the United States refines Canadian oil and they send it back as gas. The United States gets the better of the deal. And of course, they only have a trade deficit because of the energy, which they're getting at a reduced cost. If you take the energy out of the equation, the United States has a trade surplus with Canada. I'm sure Donald Trump knows that. Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, does know that, which is why he says reasonable things like, thank you, Canada, for taking the digital services tax away. So why am I so happy? Anyway, before I get there, here's the real story here. I posted this morning on X. Get it right, folks. President Donald Trump has not made trade talks contingent on dropping tariffs on dairy products. Thanks to Trump, the Carney government scrapped the ludicrous digital services tax Sunday. Talks are on. Now, why is this good news for Canada? Because a lot of people out there saying, oh, Canada caved again. Canada caved to Donald Trump. Good. I'm glad we caved to Donald Trump. This was a stupid, ludicrous, toxic tax on communications. And it was designed to prevent you from getting anything outside of Fortress Canada. This is how Mark Carney envisions Fortress Canada with a little bit of European. That's Mark Carney's vision. And keep those damn American hot big tech companies out of Canada, because we don't want you seeing news on YouTube. We don't want you seeing news on Facebook or Instagram. We don't want you watching things on Netflix because there's not enough Canadian content there. So we'll make it so it's difficult to get American communications, American social media. And that's what this digital services tax was all about. And it's a disgusting piece of legislation because it pretends it's about giving Canadians their fair share. Well, Canadians don't have a fair share of what American companies are producing. That's communism. That's Karl Marx. That's from each according to his ability, to each according, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. That's what the fair share concept is. So no, Canada doesn't deserve a piece of American tech, of American social media. No, we don't. That's extortion. The digital services tax, the DST, we already got an HST and a GST. The DST was about extorting money from American companies. That's all it was about. Just like C11 and C18. C11, of course, was about forcing companies to have Canadian content, just like television and radio have for years. C18 was about forcing these companies to pay to operate in Canada or to use Canadian news. Another piece of censorship. So now you can't see news on Facebook. The exception of Substack, I should mention that. but you can't see news on Facebook because Facebook refuses to be strong-armed, refuses to allow the Liberal government in Canada to extort money from them. So that's where this has been going for a long time. All of these bills that the Liberal government has passed in the last 10 years that are supposedly about protecting Canadian content, protecting Canadian consumers, protecting Canadian producers. They're all about limiting the amount of information, the amount of news you can see in Canada on social media. And so was the digital services tax. So that's why I'm cheering today that Carney rescinded it, because Donald Trump did it. Donald Trump is victorious in this, but so is Canada. And I'm probably not the only one saying this today. But thank God for Donald Trump, because he's probably our last line of defense against Carney's censorship program. Because we'll talk about this towards the end of the show. Mark Carney is dedicated to stamping out what he considers to be disinformation and misinformation, just like Justin Trudeau was. And that's going to come together in another Online Harms Act bill. But in the meantime, we have a respite here because Donald Trump said, get rid of your stupid DST. We're not going to do it. And those charges would have been passed on to you, or American companies would have said, why do we need to operate in Canada anyway? So let's not bother. So this was a victory. This was not a victory, unfortunately, for our good friend Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. He had a chance over the weekend to take credit for this by saying Mark Carney should rescind the DST, the Digital Services Tax, effective immediately. He needs to recall Parliament, or he needs to promise to rescind it, or at least say it's not going to take effect on Monday and we'll deal with this when Parliament resumes. Anything like that. He needed to stand up and say, I'm opposed to it, because here's what he said.
Dans cette annonce hier, oui, il a parlé de la loi 96, mais aussi parlé des géants numériques, GAFAM. Et en juin va commencer l'imposition de ces géants du numérique. 3 a été obtenu de haute lutte. Alors, si vous devenez premier ministre, allez-vous maintenir l'imposition sur les géants numériques, le GAFAM?
Oui, je supporte cette imposition. Le principe est juste. L'idée, Mme Dussault, c'est que ces entreprises gagnent de revenus ici au Canada. Donc, le principe, c'est qu'ils devraient contribuer là où ils gagnent le revenu. Donc, je pense que dans cette question, on devrait garder ça en place. Mais en même temps, il faut couper d'autres taxes et impôts pour ramener l'investissement au Canada. Pour les petites entreprises, pour des fermiers, et enlever le TPS sur les nouvelles maisons pour les rendre plus abordables, c'est la réduction d'impôts que je veux proposer, mais pas une réduction d'impôts pour les géants numériques qui autrement paieraient rien ici au Canada.
Okay, are you shocked by that? I know, I showed that clip over the weekend. That's Pierre Poilievre talking about the digital services tax in April, in the midst of the election campaign. He could have come out on Friday night, Saturday, or Sunday and said, you know, I think I was wrong in supporting this digital services tax, even if I was wrong because it's an impediment to trade talks. Pierre Poilievre chose to say nothing, just like he said nothing about a lot of other things since the end of this last election and the election of Mark Carney as Prime Minister. And I think that's really not wise. I'll put it that way. Like I say, I wanted Pierre Poilievre to win that election very badly because I think we're on a collision course with destiny under Mark Carney. And I think it's going to be a very ugly collision. I think Mark Carney is taking us to an authoritarian state. And we're going there incrementally, day by day, week by week, month by month. And I think Pierre Poilievre really had a different vision. It wasn't exactly a vision I shared 100%, but it was at least a vision that was a little freer. and that wanted a little more freedom for Canadians. And I think he should have stood up this weekend and said, I oppose the digital services tax. And you know what? He could have claimed credit for it. Instead of people like me and other independent media and new media who are out there saying, no, we've got to can this thing. It's not only hampering trade talks, it's bad legislation because it promotes censorship. But Pierre Poilievre couldn't say that. He didn't say anything, and so he can't claim credit for Mark Carney crashing the way he did. And Mark Carney did crash. And all of those people who say, no, Mark Carney understands Donald Trump. He's got a secret plan behind this. Let's listen to what Frank McKenna, the former ambassador, Canadian ambassador to the U.S., and the former premier of New Brunswick, a liberal. He was a common sense liberal, as common sense as liberals ever get. Let's listen to a few minutes of Frank McKenna saying, people, get your view straight here. This digital services tax was a stupid idea to begin with, and it's a really stupid idea when Donald Trump is saying, get rid of it or else trade talks are over.
Great to have you with us.
Thank you, and happy Canada Day weekend to you and everybody else who's listening.
To you as well. You know, this tax, which had it taken effect this morning, would have brought in upwards, the latest estimates say it would have been upwards of $2 billion US. Some of that is retroactive pay. So what position is Canada now sitting in when it comes to trade negotiations with the US? Where does this leave us?
Well, the tax was largely unloved anyway. It didn't have any real supporters in Canada and had attracted a lot of criticism. And the Minister of Finance had signaled that it would be an item that we would be prepared to negotiate at any rate. So it's no surprise we came to this conclusion. I thought that this would be the end result after the negotiation concluded, but the President clearly wanted this to be a condition precedent for the negotiations going ahead.
Is this perhaps this federal government's way of playing President Trump's game, like pushing forward with a threat or a hard tactic in order to be able to rescind and then restart?
Well, I doubt if it was that deliberate. I mean, this really started under the Trudeau administration, and it simply continued. But the amount of money involved is not great. Probably less than $1 billion a year would be collected on a run rate, and it's up against a $1 trillion relationship between Canada and the United States. So I think it was simply pragmatic for the government of Canada to flush it early on.
When's the last time you heard a liberal talk such common sense here? He's saying, why do you have this thing in the beginning? Because it's not good legislation. And secondly, you're going to make what, a couple of $1 billion off it, and in the process lose $20 billion in trade. So why are you fighting for this thing? Obviously, there's another agenda going on. And you know, when you listen to old liberals, and I'm not denigrating his age, but when you listen to older liberals like this, people who were around in the 80s, who were in government in the 80s, they talk a lot different than liberals today because they have a clear mind. They're not infected by woke policies of, we have to push through this policy no matter who gets punished. We have to push through environmental policies, even if they're insane. And even if it means we can't fly jets anymore, even if it means we can't travel, even if it means we have to give up our gas-powered cars, because it's the agenda that is more important than people. Because Frank McKenna was a common sense politician. He understood, hey, if people are suffering, if there's no common sense behind the policy, drop it. And that's what he's saying here.
And then get on to the negotiations.
Just to bring everybody up to speed on a quick timeline of talks, just in the last month, in the month of June, G7 talks were earlier this month. That's where the Prime Minister and the President announced this agreement to pursue negotiations towards a deal. We know that deadline is July 21st. Then Friday, Trump said he's done talking, terminating talks because of the digital tax. Then last night, I think it was around 10:30 p.m., the alert came on my phone. Or actually a little earlier than that, he made these comments on Fox News about Canada and that 51st state again. I'm going to play those for everybody in case they missed them.
Frankly, Canada should be the 51st state, okay? It really should, because Canada relies entirely on the United States. We don't rely on Canada.
So that was Sunday night. Then later Sunday night comes our announcement saying we've pulled back the DST. So where do you think Canada and U.S. relations stand right now? Outside of trade talks, where's our relationship sitting?
Well, look, we're dealing with a very unpredictable president. That's just fact. And we have to dig in for very tough and protracted negotiations. But I want to remind
That is a really good analysis, because as much as I love Donald Trump, yes, he can be very unpredictable. And you notice Frank McKenna didn't say, we're dealing with an erratic, off-the-wall president. He said he's unpredictable. Yes, he can be, especially when it comes to Iran, Israel, Ukraine, Russia. He's very unpredictable. And he's very unpredictable with tariffs. So I think that's a very safe and true analysis. But once again, you're not going to hear this from liberals today, because they were all about their agenda.
Remind you and Canadians that we're not without strength. What President Trump says about Canada is just dead wrong. We bring a lot to the relationship. We're the biggest buyer of American goods. We're the biggest buyer of goods from almost every state in the Union, which is pretty important. We're the biggest provider of raw materials to the United States, which are then turned into jobs in the United States of America. And on the security relationship, I did a little homework over the weekend, and the results to me were simply stunning. The United States of America has got about 300,000 troops in the Pacific. It's got 50,000 troops in Europe, some 50,000 troops in Japan, probably 10,000 troops on the Mexican border. But for 100 years, there's never been a single soldier on the U.S.-Canada border. And that's because we've always had the Americans' back. And I don't think we deserve to have a knife put in our back.
Is a brilliant piece of assessment there. Exactly. This is why it's the largest undefended border in the world. And what's he saying here? The text, the subtext here, if you will, is Frank McKenna saying to Mark Carney, stop trying to PO the Americans. Stop trying to portray the Americans as our enemies. Stop trying to cuddle up to Europe. Stop trying to rearm Europe. And yes, I know I'm putting words in his mouth, but I really believe this is what Frank McKenna is saying here. And he's also saying this: stop trying to forge defense relationships with Europe when they're irrelevant. And stop trying to pretend that our biggest trading partner, our best ally, our best friend, our biggest trading partner isn't that nation to the south of us called the United States of America. It's not Great Britain. It's not France. It's surely to God not Poland or Ukraine. It's the United States of America. So stop trying to turn the clock back. Mark Carney loves to talk about, let's look to the future. No, Mark Carney looks to the past, when Canada was a vassal state of Great Britain, a colony of Great Britain, when all we had to do was appeal to the mother country. Well, the mother country is on the verge of financial collapse under Keir Starmer right now. So get your head in order, Mark Carney. Our best friend and our biggest ally and our biggest trading partner is called the United States of America. It's not Europe. And this is what Frank McKenna is, I think, saying. I'm not going to put those words in his mouth, but I'm listening to what he's saying, and I have been around politicians for 30 plus years, and I've worked with them, I've interviewed them, I've worked beside them, behind them, in front of them. And I can tell you, I understand what they're really saying at times. And this is what Frank McKenna is saying here. Just a bit more, because this is really brilliant what he's doing here.
So we should realize when we go into these negotiations, we come from a position of strength, a reliable partner, a very strong commercial partner, and a very dependable security partner. And I think that we should go into these negotiations knowing that Canadians are proud of their country. We're not prepared to compromise when it comes to the integrity of our sovereignty.
With the
I might come back to that later if we have time. But you see what he's saying there at the end of that interview is that exactly what I said earlier. He's reiterating what Premier Daniel Smith and Pierre Poilievre have said, is that Canada has very good cards in this trade relationship, in these trade talks, because Donald Trump loves to talk about, we've got the cards, we've got all the cards, but Donald Trump is not talking about the cards that we hold. When we hold the ace, we hold the ace that can trump all of them, no pun intended, which is what the cheap oil the United States continues to buy from us and turn into gasoline. That's something you'll never hear Donald Trump talk about, because that's a card we hold. And Frank McKenna knows that. And I really enjoyed that interview, and because people have accused me of saying, you're so subjective, you don't understand that there's other opinions out there, or they're saying don't show me another opinion. I'm not here to tell you how to think. I'm here to tell you that there are other ways to think. And Frank McKenna, yes, he was a liberal all of his political life. But I think he was a common sense liberal, and he makes a lot more sense than common sense conservatives sometimes do. So, I can be that objective to put a liberal on and say, good for you, Frank McKenna. I think you're doing it. I think you're saying something that's valid here. But here's what Mark Carney tried to do. And watch this, folks. This is fascinating, because I found this interview over the weekend. And Mark Carney tried to spin this. The communications people with Mark Carney, who I think are really a bunch of amateurs, because I've worked with communications people all my life, in the military, on Parliament Hill, with the official opposition, with the Prime Minister's office. Some are good, some are bad. And I always said my motto from the Canadian Armed Forces was, if you lie, you die. Tell the truth in communications. Don't think you can lie to people and get away with it, because it'll always come back to bite you in the behind. But here's a former staffer to, I think it's Chrystia Freeland. They said the finance minister. I don't know if it's Champagne or Chrystia Freeland. Try to suggest that Mark Carney's got some hidden plan here, some secret plan to trump Donald Trump, no pun intended, over rescinding the digital service tax. Like he understands this better than anybody. And Mark Carney understands this better than anybody. Of course he doesn't. Are they playing a game? Are they playing mind games with us? You bet they are. But listen to this incredible assault on rationality.
Invite Julian Karagusian, former special advisor at the Ministry of Finance. Julian, good evening and thank you for your time. Great to see you again.
Great to see you, actually.
So do you think Canada could have waited a tad bit on this first payment set for Monday on digital tax, especially when both the Prime Minister and the President actually set 30 days of negotiations at the G7 summit?
I do think that, there are different means that we could have delayed the implementation. The Prime Minister has wide powers to do these things, as does the Finance Minister. I think this may also have been a negotiating tactic on the part of Prime Minister Carney. And there's also a separate track dealing with digital services taxation at the OECD in Paris. So we could have delayed this, and we could have pursued the international negotiations. So it leads me to think that this was obviously a tactic by Prime Minister Carney, putting a card on the table. Because, as President Trump said, he exaggerated, but he said they have more cards than we do. But we have some.
We have some, okay. But how much do you think Canada would have gained in the first place with this digital tax? I ask you this, can we sort of forego this in the larger scheme of things and where this trade war exists?
I do think we can forego it in the context of the larger trade war, given that we export, 75 to 80% of our exports go to the United States, and exports are 1/3 of our economy. In the grand scheme of things, the tax is really a pittance. It's not much at all. But the tax is part of our domestic policy, and every sovereign nation has a right to pursue domestic policies. This has been conflated by some as a tariff, but it's actually a domestic tax policy. But again, to answer your question, Akshay, this is definitely expendable in the grand scheme of things.
Okay, and let's now discuss those cards, because we've had so many conversations, Julian, about the size of our economy versus the size of the American economy and who we are up against, who we are fighting against. So what are those cards that we have that are close to our chest at the moment?
The cards that we have, we don't want to play them in the first instance, but if we're backed into a corner, we are a major energy producer. We have huge reserves of oil and gas. We're a natural resource superpower. If we're backed into a corner, we can use those to our advantage.
I'll give the guy credit for this. He understands. He understands that we do have some good cards and energy. But what I really object to about what this staffer, or former staffer to the finance department, and I don't think he worked for the minister, is that he suggests that Mark Carney had some hidden plan here, that he was going to somehow overthrow Donald Trump's whole strategy in these trade negotiations. And of course, Mark Carney had no idea what he was doing here, even though he pretended when he was interviewed last week that he knew exactly what was going on. And don't worry, we're Canada's still in charge. So anyway, that's all I'm going to play of that guy, because I'll give him credit at the end there. He does actually acknowledge what I've been saying from the beginning, is Canada has great cards in the trade relations with the United States. And I don't say that because, as I've said every day, I love Donald Trump in terms of what he's doing for the United States, in terms of what he's doing to counteract government spending, to counteract DEI policies, to counteract the whole LGBTQ agenda in the United States. I love what he's doing. And I'll support that to the end, and I'll write columns about it, and I'll say that. I don't think the tariffs have been a good idea for America or Canada or anybody else. I'm a free trader. I always have been, because I'm a Ronald Reagan Republican, if you will, even though I've never voted Republican because I'm a Canadian. But that's how I would define my politics. And I'm a libertarian increasingly, because of good people who have shown me it's more important to have personal freedom than allow the state to take that away from you. So that's what I'm saying today, is that we have got to focus on what's important in this country. And I've got one more video to show you, but I've got to show you the merchandise first. And I'm going to put my hat on. Here we are. And please look at the merchandise page. People have asked me, where is your merchandise? Well, look under store when you go to the YouTube page, and you'll find all kinds of information about the merchandise. And at this point, I want to thank Barry, who watches this show, I think every day, for watching this show. And we love you here. We really do. And thank you for being that. And we'll call you out again, I'm sure. But anyway, sorry, we've got this here. Yes, and don't forget our stickers. We've got these new stickers. And once again, we're not promoting a political party on this station. Okay, this is not what this show is about. We're not not promoting a political party. We're promoting a political train of thought, which is freedom. And whether you call yourself a small c conservative or a small l libertarian, we are for freedom on this station. And that's what the station is all about. We're fighting for freedom, especially freedom of speech. Because I just heard before I didn't have a chance to get it down in terms of a visual. I just heard before I came on the show that YouTube has pulled down another conservative, small c conservative. I don't know, never pull down a big C conservative, a small c conservative podcaster, calling it spam. So I don't know the details. And I'm not out there to say good thing or bad thing. But I tell you this, I worry about YouTube and other social media pulling down stations because they don't like the content. So now they're calling them spam? What does that even mean? I don't even know what that means. But I'm sure it's, here we go. Thank you. Somebody help me out here. Okay, who's Big Daddy now? Yeah. That is so that's so incredible. Who's Big Daddy now? Exactly. we are dealing with such a mendacious government right now. And I'll end it with this here because and I've got lots more material actually, but I don't think we want to. I don't think we need to show that one again. But well, actually, I'm going to show you this because this is what makes this a conundrum for Mark Carney. Because this is why he wanted a little bit of a fight with the United States, because it's all about his next book. And here we are on the verge of Canada Day. And this is Mark Carney talking about the hinge.
I'd say even a hinge moment of history.
To this hinge moment.
Can't handle the truth.
Resolve to resist.
Yeah, that says it all. But I want to leave this one with you here. Remember where this is going, because you say, okay, reprieved. We've been reprieved from Mark Carney's assault on free speech. He's rescinded this law, so it means he's no longer attacking free speech in this country. Not true. Listen to what Mark Carney had to say about free
Large
speech.
American online platforms have become seas of racism, misogyny, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and hate in all its forms. And they're being used by criminals to harm our children. My government will act. And today we're announcing our plan to fight crime, to protect Canadians, and to build communities that are safe, secure, and strong. A plan to make Canada secure, to make Canada strong.
You can't handle the truth.
Resolve to resist.
All right, so why do I show you that? Because this is where Mark Carney is going in terms of the government, in terms of his desire to take away basic freedoms in this country and to replace them with an authoritarian state. This is Mark Carney during the campaign trail. He said, what safe streets mean to Mark Carney What safety means to Mark Carney is getting rid of free speech. Letting the government decide what free speech is. That's what Mark Carney is all about. It's replacing traditional notions, traditional agreements about what free speech means with Mark Carney liberalism. And that means you're not going to have free speech anymore because it's not safe. It's not safe for children. Why? We've already got lots of laws in place against child pornography or anything else that would inadvertently or directly affect children. But Mark Carney wants these laws because he wants them to be against free speech and pretend they're preserving freedom in this country. And that's got nothing to do with his agenda. He is moving towards an authoritarian state every day at an alarming rate. And we have to continue to fight against that. So I'll sum it up today by saying this. Pierre Poilievre is too obsessed with winning his by-election in Alberta, which I've said is going to be a tough run for him because every doorstep he goes to, well, every other doorstep he goes to is going to ask him, why should Alberta stay in Confederation when we have to spend $2 billion a year subsidizing Quebec? Why should Alberta be part of Canada when we get nothing out of it except the sneers of Eastern Canada? Why should Alberta stay in Canada when we get nothing out of it except being labeled as the hinterland that just pays the bills? It's going to be a very difficult by-election for Pierre Poilievre. Of course he'll win, but it's going to be very different for him than it was in Ontario. Thank you for watching today, folks. We love you here at this station. Thank you for your support. And this is just the beginning of fighting for freedom. We're going to continue to do that every day, every week, and every month, just as the Carney government pushes back on freedom every day, every week, and every month. We've been broadcasting live from Ottawa today, as we do every day, 7 days a week. This has been Stand on Guard. I'm your host, David Krayden. Thank you for watching today. And we'll be back again tomorrow.